Hey, now we're back for the final part of this lecture on media effects, or some of the kind of theories of media that might be helpful to you. So, what are the effects of the media? Some commentators argue that the media are a debased or negative form of culture and are responsible for the spread of kind of negative things. And this kind of, this kind of draws on the notion of the media as something that tranquilizes or distracts the masses or can even be kind of damaging to them. This is a very Marxist take on the media. And then kind of both sides of the debate, which I'm going to be speaking about a bit more. This is the debate about whether the media is, in very simple terms, a good thing or a bad thing. Both sides of kind of politics and of the debate can use the media to generate moral panics. So this can be moral panics about young people sexting or people getting involved in like X, Y, and Z. So if you think back to I believe it was the week on youth in which we spoke a bit about moral panics. Moral panics are generally overblown concerns that take a kind of nugget of truth of something that's happening out there in the world and then turn it into the source of something to be incredibly paranoid about. So an interesting moral panic that I heard about recently was apparently in the US, where there was a secondary school where a really large number of the senior final year students got pregnant. Apparently, the principal of that secondary school made some kind of throwaway remark that the people, the young women there had a pregnancy pact, and they'd all entered into a pact to all get pregnant, and there was really no truth to that. But certain parts of the media really ran with that one, and suddenly there was a lot of panic about like, a young woman making a pregnancy pact. How do I stop my daughter from making a pregnancy pact? Even though it wasn't really a legitimate thing, it even became a Lifetime movie of the same name. So that's a really paradigm example of a moral panic, something that there's some maybe nugget, like tiny bit of truth to it, in that it did start from a large number, like abnormally large number of young women at a specific school getting pregnant, but it kind of just absolutely snowballed from there in a way that was completely disproportionate and not even true to what was actually happening. So I have an article that I've linked here that may be interesting, that explores how teen girls kind of navigate sexualization in digital spaces. So this is kind of trying to engage critically with the notion that that new media has an effect of kind of exposing young women to kind of early sexualization. So the notion that the media is bad, put in very simple terms, can be attributed in part to the neo-Marxist perspective coming from the Frankfurt School. So you'll remember that we covered this a bit in the week on subcultures, and this group of thinkers argued that that popular culture is a low water based form of culture that it kind of detracts from the ability of the population to think critically, and therefore stabilizes capitalism through the absence of critical thinking. So very much the notion that the media is a destructive force because it distracts us from what we actually need to be thinking about. It distracts us from what's important. And then the media is good, or the more kind of positive analysis of the media, is often coming from cultural sociologists who take a positive view of the effects of mass media. So they often highlight the ways in which different forms of culture and media can be empowering for individuals, and they also look at media as as a site of cultural resistance in many cases, or a way of kind of putting out new messages. So not just parroting or reinforcing the status quo, but challenging the kind of status quo. So you can think about like music as a way of challenging things. I'm sure you can think of contemporary examples of different forms of media being used to to push back against specific social norms and to challenge these norms. So the media is not necessarily a one-sided thing. And so cultural sociologists have this more positive or hopeful view of mass culture as something that can not necessarily be repressive, solely repressive, but can also be very creative and can be a site at which cultural creation is occurring, and norms are shaped and challenged in a way that's not not just reinforcing these kind of normalized forms of inequality. So coming to some of the theories of the experience of those who are consuming media, which I think is really important. We have media audience theory. So most media theorists these days acknowledge that consumption of media is not a purely passive thing. So we don't just sit back and consume media uncritically, and it's not that there's a direct route from the screen to our brain. We're not necessarily just absorbing all of these ideas and thinking, yes, all of this is 100% true and valid, and I have no further feelings. Like, clearly, if you think about the way that you consume media, that would not be true in the vast majority of cases. So, media audience theory and theorists working in this area argue that it's important to essentially look at how those that consume media make their own specific meanings from media, how they understand and relate to media, the different meanings that they attribute to it, how they identify with certain like characters. There's certain shows and such that people watch purely to laugh at, or watch as a guilty pleasure, or maybe watch and have a bit of a running commentary of those particular shows. So I think I think the really important point here is that it's not necessarily, as I was saying earlier in this lecture, it's not necessarily enough to look at the media and say, okay, the media says X, therefore that's why society is sexist, or like, the media is perpetuating this specific idea, so that's what everyone thinks. It's necessary to look at not only the message the media is sending, but how that message is received. Maybe people that are reading that particular article, or maybe people that have been exposed to reporting on specific topics are relating to them in more critical ways. Perhaps they are watching the news and thinking, oh, the way that was reported is really, really uncomfortable, and I feel like this is incorrect, or that could have been done differently or better. So it's not necessarily that they're purely absorbing these ideas. And this is kind of built upon by what we can call postmodern forms of media analysis. So the basic idea underpinning this is that the media doesn't offer a reflection of reality. So it's not that the media is kind of skewing reality. It's that there is no kind of sole reality to be offered by the media. It's the notion that there's no kind of core truth. The media is kind of it doesn't it basically means what you think it means. So the media is a text like any other text, which can be kind of read and attributed meaning, and so its meaning and its kind of status is really based on the audience rather than the media itself. So this is similar to the kind of death of the author argument in which it's not really as important what an author intended for a work to mean as it is what a reader sees in the work. That the work is not the author doesn't have kind of ownership over what their book, for instance, means. That is to be determined by the audience and the reading public who are engaging with the work. So it's a similar idea here in postmodern media analysis, that there's not a single kind of truth of what this news story or what this article is telling us. There are many possible readings and many ways that meanings can be assigned to it, and therefore this type of approach uses interpretation to try and understand like what kind of cultural ideas are being deployed in this, and how can we understand this, and what kind of meanings can we take from this. So again, it's looking at, rather than the kind of point of creation of aspects of media, it's looking at the reception of media. And then an interesting part of this is the kind of power of the media in structuring the boundary between kind of what's real and what isn't real. So much of what we experience these days is very much mediated. So I think an interesting development in this idea would be things like virtual holidays. The notion of being able to engage in tourism from your own home, and being able to engage in virtual tours of places. That's something that's been floated quite a bit now that we are less able to travel, at least for the kind of short-term future. And so simulacras are things that we consume from the media, generally audiovisual material, that can become just as real as the original things that they refer to. So an example of this would be the way that in China there's a kind of model of, I think it's a like Parisian village or like some other part of the world that's been built there, and people go there to visit and to experience what it's like, living in this certain part of France. Or I may be getting the country wrong, but that's not really the important thing here. And so, they experience that and don't really see it as being incredibly distinct from what this would actually be like in France. So this village itself is what we would call a simulacra, a kind of copy. And this is very much, this idea is put forward in the point from Adorno and Horkheimer that real life has become indistinguishable from the movies. So a example of that, which I think is really interesting, is some images from a casino in Las Vegas where gamblers kind of position themselves as members of the ancient world and engage in the simulacra of aristocracy. So there's this kind of old architecture and things that hark back to like ancient Rome, and give you that sense of this kind of experience. So finally, the final kind of idea I wanted to talk about is about the affordances of new media and affordance theory in general. So a perspective that looks at the affordances of new media focuses on what kind of opportunities, potentials, and capacities media offers to us. And this theory focuses particularly on new media, things like social media, network technologies. And so this perspective helps us to think about what does new media help us to do? What does it allow us to do differently? For instance, it might focus on how things like instant messaging technologies help us to communicate with friends and family and help us to maintain relationships over geographical distance, and augment and deepen relationships with people that are physically close to us. An example that I have of the affordances of new media is obviously I relocated from Melbourne to come up here for to work here at Newcastle, and I still like to stay in contact with my friends from Melbourne. And so every or most Friday nights, I have a kind of video chat catch up with a few friends from Melbourne. We kind of sit. Sometimes we play like some kind of like game or something. Often we just chat and kind of have a drink. And there really is the feeling of kind of immediacy and connection and closeness that you probably wouldn't have from simply a telephone call. So this new media, the ability to simultaneously kind of do things online and have video that's good enough quality and quick enough that it kind of feels as though you're almost sharing physical space, allows for the maintenance of relationships in a way that telephone calls might not quite. So this is an interesting kind of affordance of new media that did not necessarily mean the same thing in older forms of media. So ultimately, we are part of what we would call a networked society. We're always kind of interconnected, and I think affordance theory is interesting because it helps us to look at the kind of opportunities or the new capacities that this networked society provides to us. It's not necessarily looking at positives versus negatives, which is the way that I was framing the kind of earlier perspectives on the media. It's more just looking at what do new technologies allow us to do. These might be good things or bad things. I'm sure new technologies have been an absolute boon for people that are trying to coordinate terrorist attacks. Like, that's not good, and we don't want that to happen, but it is still an affordance of new media, just as new media has helped people to connect over time and space. So, in conclusion, these days, no one can really escape the media. It is ubiquitous and it is all around us. And I think none of us have presumably been able to escape the media for long, unless you're streaming this from a cabin with no electricity and will immediately turn off your computer or phone after you're finished. And it's been argued that there's nothing that's particularly new, that things are endlessly recycled. So this is the kind of argument about simulacra. However, I would argue that that's not necessarily true. Media and popular culture are constantly changing, constantly showing innovation. They have a referent in what is familiar. They are aware of kind of genres and formulas from the past. But we have this constant kind of process of creation as we take advantage of the affordances of new technologies, and we use the media to either, depending on how you look at it, distract the masses or engage creatively and critically with forms of culture, and sometimes engage in creating them. Really depends on your perspective. So, for more on especially the kind of theories around the media, please do have a look at the textbook chapter for this week, and especially have a look at the theorists and authors who are being cited in that chapter. If there's any particular theory or any particular concepts you think will be really useful to you if you're writing your essay on this topic, go and have a look at the work of that particular person. Go to the kind of primary source. That's always the best way to do it, and have a read of that. I think you'll find it really, really useful to you. So I'll leave this here. Thank you so much for your time and attention this week, and I will see you in again in week 12 for our final lecture on environmental sociology. Have a great couple of weeks until then.